Most people starting Mounjaro expect weight loss. What they are often less prepared for are the practical realities of being on it day to day. The changes in appetite, the side effects, the impact on eating habits, energy levels, muscle mass, and even the emotional and social side of food. Hello, I'm Dr. David Stokes. I'm a GP in Sussex, and in this video I want to talk about the many things people say they wish they had known before starting Mounjaro. Now, there's a huge amount of information online about medications like Mounjaro. Some of it's excellent, some of it's wildly unrealistic, so I wanted to try and make a balanced video to discuss the things that tend to surprise people most once they start the medication. Now, obviously this video is for general information only and not personal medical advice. And if you're taking Mounjaro, you should discuss your own situation with a clinician prescribing it. So let's start with probably the biggest surprise for many people. Appetite changes feel different from what most people expect. People often imagine that Mounjaro will simply make you less hungry. But many describe something more noticeable than that. A phrase that you'll hear bandied around a lot is that the food noise has gone quiet. But what does that mean? People who've spent years constantly thinking about food, planning meals, craving snacks, feeling pulled towards eating, suddenly find these thoughts become much quieter. Some people say they forget meals entirely. Others that foods they previously found irresistible suddenly become a lot easier to just walk straight past. And for many people, that change can feel surprisingly emotional because they realise how much of their mental energy had been tied up into their food and their appetite for years. At the same time, it can also feel a bit strange in a social situation. You may go out for a meal with friends and find that you only want a small portion. You may stop enjoying alcohol in the same way. There is actually good evidence that these medications can reduce the desire to drink through similar pathways to the ways they quieten food cravings. Some people even find their relationship with comfort eating changes quite dramatically. And although that can be very helpful, it can still take some adjustment psychologically. Weight is not the only thing being lost. One of the most important things I wish more people understood before starting these medications is that when you lose weight, you are not only losing fat, you can also lose some muscle mass. And this is worth understanding because the picture is more nuanced than sometimes it's made out to be. The evidence is reassuring in one sense. The majority of the weight lost on Tirzepatide, Mounjaro, using body composition studies consistently shows that the fat mass accounts for the larger part of what goes. But a meaningful proportion of the lean mass can also be lost alongside it. And in people who eat very little, avoid protein, and do nothing in the way of resistance exercise, that proportion tends to be slightly greater. Now, muscle loss matters far more than many people appreciate. Muscle is central to strength, mobility, balance, but also to our metabolic health and our long-term independence. Losing it quietly while the scales fall can leave people feeling weaker and more tired than they expected, even when the weight loss itself looks very impressive. So one of the most common mistakes I see people assuming that they should simply eat as little as possible while the medication does its work. In reality, the goal should be improving body composition and long-term health, and not just watching the number on the scales going down and down and down. This usually means prioritising protein, staying physically active, and ideally doing some form of resistance training. Even something fairly simple, done consistently, can make a real difference. The medication can do a great deal of the heavy lifting when it comes to appetite, but it cannot protect your muscle for you. Side effects. Many people will have heard about side effects. But most of them do improve with time, but some things can make them worse. Side effects people hear about most are nausea, constipation, diarrhea, bloating, acid reflux, fatigue, and sometimes people describe having sulphurous burps. Importantly, these side effects are often worse after an increase in dose, after a very large meal, after fatty meals, or when people become dehydrated. One thing many people wish they'd known earlier is that eating smaller meals more slowly often helps considerably. Trying to eat the same size meals you were eating before you started treatment can often make people feel really quite unwell. Another important point is that there's often pressure online to increase people's dose quickly. And it's as if the higher doses are always better. But in practice, some people do very, very well staying on lower doses for longer. Treatment should usually be guided by tolerability and overall progress, and not simply rushing upwards as fast as possible. Another point is that hydration matters more than most people expect. This is something that is often underestimated. Because appetite reduces, sometimes people unintentionally drink less as well. Add in nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation. Dehydration can be surprisingly common. People may notice dizziness, fatigue, constipation, or are feeling generally washed out. And dehydration becomes particularly important if someone develops a sickness bug while taking medications like this. I've got another video talking about sick day rules and medications that you should avoid in situations like this that might be of use. So in summary, maintaining your hydration is far more important than many people realised before starting treatment. And in fact, staying hydrated can reduce some of those other side effects. Another thing I hear is that the emotional side often takes people by surprise. One of the more interesting things people talk about is how much these medications can affect the emotional side of eating. For some people, food has long been associated with stress relief, reward, comfort, routine, or the social connection which is so important. And when appetite changes rapidly, people sometimes realise these habits and emotional associations were playing a much bigger role than they'd anticipated. Some people obviously feel relieved, others can feel unsettled by the change, and some notice that friends or family react differently to their weight loss. And for some people, the pace of physical change can feel psychologically quite strange, even when it's what they wanted. And this is one reason why I think long-term success here is rarely about the medication itself. It's also about building healthier routines, healthier relationships with food, and healthier lifestyles overall. The internet creates unrealistic expectations. If you spend enough time online, it can start to feel as though everyone loses huge amounts of weight effortlessly and immediately. But as with so many things, social media naturally amplifies dramatic stories. People who lose weight slowly, steadily, or less dramatically often don't post about it, and individual responses to medications varies enormously. Some people respond strongly to low doses, others lose weight more gradually, and some plateau for periods of time. And again, I want to be clear, slow progress is not failure, and comparison can be very unhelpful when people are constantly measuring themselves against carefully selected success stories online. Long-term thinking is important. Another thing people wish they'd understood earlier is that obesity and weight regulation are often long-term biological issues and not simply short-term willpower problems. For many people, these medications work because they help counter the powerful biological drivers of hunger and appetite. But long-term health still depends on the foundations of nutrition, physical activity, sleep, muscle strength, and sustainable habits. It's also important for people to understand that weight regain after stopping treatment is common. It's also important for people to understand that weight regain after stopping treatment is common. And the data here is quite striking. In the SURMOUNT-4 trial, which has been published in the JAMA Internal Medicine journal, more than 4 in 5 people who stopped Tirzepatide, Mounjaro, regained at least a quarter of the weight they had lost within a year of stopping. Now clearly this is not a failure of willpower. It reflects the fact that the underlying biology of appetite and weight regulation has not gone away simply because the weight has come off. And that is why I think these medications are best understood as long-term treatments for a long-term condition, rather than, of course, something that you can take until you hit a target weight and then just stop. A few important safety points. Finally, although these medications can be extremely helpful for many people, they are not suitable for everyone. People with certain gastrointestinal conditions, a history of pancreatitis, where the evidence on safety remains unclear rather than clear-cut, people with significant eating disorders, and those who are pregnant or planning to become pregnant should not be starting these medications. Another contraindication, which is less widely well known, people with a family history of medullary thyroid cancer or a condition called multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2 should not take tirzepatide at all. And it's worth mentioning this to your prescriber if either of those two conditions applies to you. One final point, if while taking any of these medications, someone develops severe abdominal pain, persistent vomiting, signs of dehydration or becoming acutely unwell, they should seek prompt medical advice rather than waiting to see whether things settle. This can be a sign of pancreatitis, which is a very severe condition indeed. For some people, medications like Mounjaro can be transformative, but I think people tend to do best when they understand the realities properly beforehand, and not just the dramatic before and after photos you'll see online. If you found this video helpful, please let me know in the comments. If you had any other thoughts that I haven't addressed after starting this medication, I'd love to hear them. And also, if you'd like, I can make further videos on preserving muscle while losing weight, for example. Just let me know what would be useful to you. Many thanks.